tātou. E te whānau, whae kia marama, kia whaitake roto i au mahi katoa, kia tū, kia kaha, kia hora te marino, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou kia tātou katoa, Amen. E tū, o te waita divinity. Kawaiata, kia Maria,
he mihi ana au hoki ki ngā mātua tūpuna. Ko rātou anō I whakarite ai I ngā tika ngā kawanga mā tāpuno o te ao Māori katoa. Nō reira mihi kawana au kia rātou mā kua mene atu ki te poa. Hai atu. E tika anō hoki. Me mihi ana au kia tātou. Kia koe anō e te tuakana. Mā wano ai whakahonare mai kia mātou kia tātou tēnei pō. Tēnei hui ngā I raro I te tuanui te maru o tēnei o tātou whare. Te wahine o tāmaki makaurau. Nō reira kei te mihi. Kei te mihi ana hau kia koe kia koutou o te roaroa. O ngā puhi o ngā tipara. Mihi kawanau kia koutou kapu. Hoi anō, ki te tuakana I tō taha hoki. E tika ana me mihi atawa hau kia koe kia koutou anō. Mau anō hei hiki hei hāpai tēnei a tātou kaupapa. Nō reira kia kōrua tahi ngā tuakana. Tēnā kōrua, tēnā kōrua, tēnā kōrua. Tēnā tātou katoa. tēnei poa, tēnei haura, I hāpai ai, tēnei a tātai kaupapa. Nō reira, e mihi ana tēnei uri no te rarawa, no ngā puhi, no ngā tipa tua ki o tamatea. E mihi kawanau kia koutou hoi anō kia tātou I tēnei wā. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora koutou. Tūtira mai ngā iwi, tātou tātou e. Tūtira mai ngā iwi, tātou tātou e. Whai a te maramatanga, me te aroha e ngā iwi, ki a patapatahi, ki a patahira, tātou tātou e. Tātou tātou e. Ia wehi. Kia ora tata katoa.
I'm assuming this is the part where it's us. Matariki hunga nui, matariki e whakatata mai nei, te whitu tapu o te tau, te mātahi o te tau, tēnei kā mihi. Ngā mihi o te tau hou Māori, kia koutou katoa, koutou I manawa nui mai, ki te tai mai I tēnei pō. It would have been so easy to stay at home with the cozy little jammies on by 7:30. Hoi anō I whai whakaro koutou ki te hara mai konei e mihi ana kia koutou katoa. Ko Stacey Morrison tōku ingoa, e hara au te kaupapa nui o te pō, engari he uri tēnei no te arawa, no ngai tahu hoki. Engari, the woman of the night, every night. The Matariki star! Now she is the Dean of Law at AUT. In brackets, acting, but she's method acting. Khylee Quince, tēnā koe. Would you like to introduce yourself and how do you do that when you're good at so many things?
Not so good at that bit, but I'll give it a stab. So, tēnā koutou katoa, tēnei te mihi māhana ka koutou, ka nui te hare kiti a koutou, ko Khylee Quince tōku ingoa, he uri o Ngāpuhi Ngāti Porou, me Ngāti Kahununu hoki, nō reira tēnā koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koe e hoa Stacey. So, kia ora, evening everyone, I'm kind of speechless, which doesn't happen very often, but I am, because it's cold and I couldn't imagine, I've been dreading this for weeks. But how, you know, when Leonie asks you, you kind of say yes and you run out of excuses, so yeah, I'm kind of blown away that all these people have come out on a cold winter's night for that.
Tell us what you know about the people who have come out tonight. Some look suspiciously like law students who are perhaps looking for better grades. Who else do we have here that you can see?
I can see old allies, I can see colleagues from AUT, I can see colleagues from the law school. Slightly worried, I'm not sure whether that's tautoko or surveillance. I can see my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, so say nice things about their son/brother. Yeah, lots of amazing people that I admire, allies, old social justice warriors, so yeah, lots of yeah, the whānau.
I think it's fair to say everyone's a social justice warrior who's here tonight. Wahine mā, tāne mā. I always enjoy the men who are big enough to be in rooms like this. When you talk about an in-law, I just try to imagine getting you as a daughter-in-law, and I just think, well, I've done something right in life. We might as well start personal. So, how long have you been part of this whānau?
Since I was 14, so my partner David and I, when we first met we were in the same class at the Standard 1 at Wairaka Primary. Age was a bit early, so we waited till Mount Roskill Grammar for form in 1987 when we were 15. So, that's been quite some time.
So you've always been a good judge of character. Is that what happened? I mean, it's fantastically frustrating that you sorted that out so early.
Lazy, really.
Haven't you tried any of your useless ngāpuhi men that you make? I don't recommend it. Would you say that that's a big part of your life? And I mean, I look at your ascension and the fact that you've been so successful. What part of your life and that success has David played?
Well, obviously home. I mean, for people that do lots of different things, whether it's work and all of the other things, you need to get your stability and your being settled at home. So being settled at home is really important. Providing stability for children. We have 3 children. I rank myself as a parent, to be honest. I think I'm pretty good at that. So that's another kind of source of obviously enjoyment, but also like just the stability, I suppose.
But that's what's amazing. So you are, and I'm just going to keep on saying it, the Dean of Law at AUT. But you really turn up as a parent, don't you? This is something that's important to you. How do you do that? What are the things that are important to you to show your kids that you centre them in your life?
I do turn up. They don't like it necessarily. So I've been on all of the boards. I go to all of the camps. I go on all of the school trips. Tomorrow night is cross-campus Matariki concert at Mount Roskill. The kids, my daughters were sort of whispering amongst themselves last night to ask if I was coming. Of course, I'm cooking dinner for 50 kids before the concert and on my own. Then they said, but are you coming to the concert? And I said, yes. And they said, well, can you sort your hair out before or wear a beanie? They're not terribly grateful.
Because I noticed that it's a recent change. And what are the feedback that you've had from your kids?
So the first night they yelled down the corridor, Walton style, good night, Draco, Malfoy.
So she's winning. When I say that you are the first Māori Dean of Law at AUT, that unfortunately means that you're the only. Why has it taken so long?
Well, that's the same question that applies across a lot of different professions and spaces. And that's, that is the sharp end of colonisation, right? It is present in our lives every day. It's the undereducation of our parents, of our grandparents, of our tupuna. It's the dispossession of land and resources, but also the ability to be a professional. You need to have done, 20 years really worth of work to climb the ladder, I suppose. And people didn't really get on the ladder until 25, 30 years ago. So. And that's the same across, as I say, a lot of different places. So it is quite amazing that we're still having firsts in 2021, but there are lots of other firsts that still haven't happened.
What are some firsts you want to see happen?
Oh, Prime Minister.
Was that an offer?
Oh no. Yeah, Chief Justice in my profession.
Okay, that's just a mark. But there are incredible things happening and more that needs to happen. Tell me about the response to you having this first role as the first Māori Dean of Law. At any university in New Zealand, isn't it?
So there are only, outside of Māori studies, departments of Māori studies, there are only, I think, 4 or 5 heads of department outside of Māori studies who are Māori. So it's very unusual. It's not just a law thing. It's all professional, all departments and disciplines outside of Māori studies per se.
So reaction surprised you even, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. So within 24 hours of my appointment, that had been retweeted 8,000 times, which was
I did one of them.
Surprise to me, and a surprise to the people at the university, the comms team who wasn't prepared for that. And I think that's part of it, is that things that we see are important. That's not about me, right? It could have been Mickey Mouse as long as they were Māori. But things that are first to us, we know that they're news to us, and in Māori Pacific communities particularly, and migrant communities too. But in the broader sense, it was kind of lost. And so that was a learning, I suppose, for other people to know that these things are still, pressing and important.
And you talked about how hard it is for many of our people to even get on that ladder. what did that ladder look like for you? Did someone put the ladder in front of you, or did you go and scrap and look for the ladder in the attic?
Well, I suppose that's where I say that I've never had a plan in relation to a career, really. Other than the general career of law, I've told the story many times that I decided I wanted to be a lawyer when I was 11, watching LA Law.
Me too.
Yeah.
But it was actually just about the outfits.
It was about the outfits, Victor Cifuentes, the cars. It looked cool.
And is it just like that, being a lawyer?
No. Sad misrepresentation, but that was what planted the seed, was TV. That looked amazing. So the general area, that was a plan, I suppose, from age 11. Had no models to do that. Again, I've told the story before that my father, we obviously didn't have any lawyers in the family. People who'd been represented by lawyers, but not lawyers in the family. And so my dad, when I was in Form 1 at Normal Intermediate, he rang the Law Society and said he had an 11-year-old daughter that was interested in going and being a lawyer, and could they find a young female graduate for us to have lunch with? And they did. And so we wagged. I took the day off school and we caught the bus to town and had lunch with this young graduate, and that kind of planted the seed. So, you know, there are things that people do that are really significant. I had a teacher at Roskill Grammar, a history and social studies teacher, who normalised going to university for my partner and I and a couple of others. And so I always, Mickey to her, Miss Hartstrong. She's still there. She's taught my children, so she's hardcore. Yeah, so people that, you know, there are all these encounters in your life that help you get there.
Were you a natural and great student?
I was a really good student, but I was a very quiet student. I never said boo. I know.
I can't picture it, sorry.
My first morning tea when I was a staff member, you know, with the professors and everybody else, and the first professor said, "Oh, you know, nice to meet you. I'm Mike. Where did you go to law school?" I said, "Here." In your class. So I was really quiet. I've been making up for it ever since.
And I love that about you. When it comes to making change, we look at te ao marama, and that's one of the changes, and I guess it's best for you to explain. What does te ao marama, the court system, mean to lay people? Can you please not speak law?
I'll try not to speak law. So we have another first, our first Māori Chief District Court Judge, Hemi Taumaunu, and he has rolled out what's called a work program, I suppose, so a program of work across all of the benches of the District Court, which includes the Family Court, the Youth Court, and he's called it Te Ao Marama, and of course most of you will know that that's a reference to Māori cosmological story of the separation of Rangi and Papa, and when they were separated by their son Tāne Rangi, he glimpsed light under his father's armpit, and that light is Te Ao Marama, the world of light and enlightenment. So the metaphor is that it's about potential and about becoming enlightened, and so the idea is that courts so far, for many people, Māori, women, marginalised people, actually all sorts of people, have not been welcoming places. You know, courts are supposed to be places where you go to get justice, and they have not done a very good job of that. But there are certain pockets of courts that have done a better job, and those are specialist courts like the rangatahi courts, like the alcohol and other drug treatment courts, and they have practices that are quite different. They tend to be non-adversarial, so they're not about, you know, a winner and a loser as you get in an ordinary criminal case. They're very team focused. They're about looking at the problems underlying offending, whether that be family situations, alcohol or addictions or mental health issues. And so the idea of the Te Ao Marama work program is to mainstream those things. So rather than the way that those courts operate and being much more whānau friendly and being problem or solution focused and in being team focused and having consistency in terms of having the same judge look after you. One of the really frustrating things of going to a criminal court or a family court where it might be a process that lasts for months or even years, is that you'll turn up and you'll have a different judge. You have to start your story all over again, so they're not picking up the file and running with it because they know who you are. So you have to keep establishing relationships. Those specialist courts are consistent in that sense. You have the same judge. They know who you are, they know your whānau, they know what the problems are here, and so you might be turning up numerous times, but at least you're not starting from scratch. So that kind of kaupapa, that's what Te Ao Marama is. So to help ensure that courts are places where people can go to get a fair hearing. So it's really around being tika and being pono, so being correct, proper, fair and just.
But some people interpret that as not being as punitive, and they're quite into the idea of being punitive. How do you help people look at that in a different way? Or see the benefits of things like Te Ao Marama and the Rangatahi Court?
So as a starting point, that is a good point. New Zealanders are extremely punitive people. You know, our imprisonment rate, particularly the hyper-incarceration of Māori, is out of this world. I mean, it is literally near the worst in the world. So we are incredibly harsh and punitive people. Having said that, people that have this view of what we call the victim-offender dichotomy, that justice processes are just about people that do bad things and the people they do bad things to, that is a false binary. That is not really the true picture. For one, that dissatisfaction that we mentioned in relation to courts is not just in relation to offenders, but of course in relation to victims. Victims are horrendously dissatisfied. So I was part of a working group for the Chief Victims Advisor in 2019. We put out a report, we did a big number of consultative hui to ask victims about their experiences of court processes. None of them were surprising to us. It's a long-standing pattern of exclusion, re-traumatisation, dissatisfaction, poor communication, particularly with Crown lawyers or police prosecutors. So Te Ao Marama is good for both sides of the fence, if you like, victims and offenders. So problem-solving, non-adversarial kaupapa or ways of doing justice actually serve most people. So I think we need to get away from thinking about punitive and non-punitive, because victims, they are already saying they're not happy with the way things work now.
Because one of the elements of Te Ao Marama approach that I've seen is that every member of the court will stand up and say who they are, and it kind of struck me that seems quite basic. Why is that revolutionary?
Yeah, and I've seen judges resist that because they see themselves, so one of the big distinctions between, you know, Māori ways of doing things and particularly Pākehā ways of doing things in the law is this sort of mythology of objectivity. And what that means is that the judge is not John Smith, the judge is the judge. You know, it's a position rather than a person. And that's why you wear particular kākahu, you wear particular gowns. So and similarly, lawyers behave as if they are in an arm's length relationship with clients. That's very foreign to us, that you have people representing you, talking for you and with you without having a personal connection. So that wasn't an easy, so you say it sounds really obvious and really basic, but it was not an easy thing to get across the line, to get judges, particularly judges, to introduce themselves. And other members of the court, registrars for example, you know, in legal terms, they're really supposed to be invisible. They're there as non-people almost. So, which again is very foreign to us, right? That if you're there, you're there.
I just saw it as demystifying. When I saw that happen in a report on Marae, you could just see that the room changed a little bit, because otherwise you go into those situations and it is very foreign, and so that's just one thing that breaks it down. But people, as you say, don't like to think that we're letting people away with crimes. So when it comes to the incarceration rates, is it as simple as a Māori woman especially, could do the same crime as someone else and the response to that crime will be completely different? Or why are more Māori women especially incarcerated?
So, complicated question, but I'll try to break it down in a couple of ways. So if we think about why so differentiated responses, that's partly true. So, but I think the answer to that question is really this, is that the pathways to prison are different for different populations. So there are typologies or types of offending and risk factors, to use sort of criminological terms, that operate in people's lives on the outs, in the community, that are more likely to lead them into prison. So when we think about sort of types of offending, if you like, or there are ways that females tend to offend, and there are ways that Māori tend to offend, or in their story pathway to prison. So for women, for example, women's offending is almost always, women's offending that's serious enough to take you to prison is almost always connected with a man or some men, whether that's your partner, your father, brothers, so it's almost always connected to men. Women almost always have very long victimisation histories. So men are different. Māori have different pathways again, and those pathways are, include poverty, include dispossession and disconnection in terms of cultural identity, but and of course racism. So Māori women are the combination, and that's the theory of intersectionality, right? Everybody has different variables in their lives, and so for Māori women they have both race and gender, also class, also sexuality sometimes, whatever it has one. So all of those variables come together to make a unique offending profile. And for Māori women, it's a unique one. It's different from Māori men, and it's different from non-Māori women. And so the way it's different from Māori men is that colonisation played out differently for Māori women than it did for Māori men. You know, we were dispossessed in ways that Māori men were not. We were earlier dispossessed. Well, we had no legal personality for one. We couldn't hold land. We couldn't make contracts. We couldn't sign the treaty. Some women did, but others were turned away. And so the position of Māori women was diminished far quicker than the position of Māori men. And that has set us up to be quite different people and have different experiences of colonisation. The violence experienced by Māori women that leads them to prison is also different. So the victimisation history is usually one of lateral violence. So lateral violence is where you are harmed by people within your own community. So when we talk about Māori male offenders, they are offending against Māori women. And that's, you know, that's a particular kind of spirit damage or harm or mamai that is quite different. So there are unique situations that lead Māori women to prison. Solo parenthood, so the economic pressures. Māori children, like 2/3 of all Māori children are born to a solo parent. That's at the time of birth. Wow. I mean, that's huge. So the economic pressures are different. So with all of that background, when you get to the ultimate question is, if you do the same thing as one, you're more likely to do the thing. But if you are doing the same thing as, say, another non-Māori female offender, then you have other circumstances that come into play. So a judge that makes the decision essentially has two decisions, or one major decision: do you send them to prison, or do you keep them in the community? And to be kept in the community is sometimes about the seriousness of the harm, but it's also about the other capital that you bring to navigate your way out of that. And that can be money. So, you know, if you're on a benefit, you can't pay reparation, you can't pay a fine. You might not have a package that you can present if you're a middle class person to say, I'm going to do these things. I've set up this community service, I've said sorry, I've done all of this. So you don't have all of the social, cultural and economic capital that people can use to navigate their way out of the inevitable prison sentence. So all of those things are sort of really against many of the wahine Māori that end up in prison.
So what can be done, and whether this is from the government or from anybody, to reduce that very high rate of both incarceration and victimisation of women in general and Māori women.
So in relation to incarceration, so if the question is, how do you keep people out of prison? The answer is really nothing to do with prison at all. It is to, prisons and racist and discriminatory criminal justice systems are just a reflection of racist and discriminatory societies. It's as simple as that. And unequal societies. So the answer is fix the society, which means, have adequate income levels, have just all of the opportunities, so resource sharing, power and opportunities available to everyone in the community. Once you have the conditions to live functional, healthy, flourishing lives, because people assume, or many people assume, that offenders are there by their own choice. And actually offenders tell this to you all the time. You ask them why they're here and you say, I made some really dumb decisions. I made some really dumb choices. But actually, there are the other things. So the first thing is, you fix the society, and that's really about poverty and inequality. The second thing is judges just need to make different decisions and choose not to send people to prison. That's as simple as that. In the last 3 years, we've seen a reduction of 15%, which is massive and really relatively quickly. So that's the first thing, is you change social conditions that people live in. And in relation to violence, it's really the same story, except there are different things at play, I think, in relation to violence. And again, it comes down to the nature of the criminal justice system, is that the Pākehā system treats offending as critical incidents. And I'm quite wary about talking about intimate partner violence, because in the house here we have Whaia Ruth Bush, who's probably New Zealand's premier violence scholar in this. So I hope, Ruth, jump up, I know you will if I make a mistake. But say that the treats violence in a non-relational sense, as if this is one thing that has happened between two people that don't know each other. It is almost it's a normatively male model. That it's like I met you. It's like a pub fight. I've never seen you before, and I've hit you. So the fact that someone is in a relationship with someone, and this has happened numerous times before, and may happen again, and may actually still want to live together, the system is not set up to cope with that, which makes it very difficult then, because you're isolating people from a relationship, treating it as an incident rather than a relational issue. Makes it very difficult then. How do you then get to fix the relationship, to live together? So again, the way you fix that is you treat it like if it was wahine Māori and tāne Māori you're talking about, then that's really the whānau order approach, right? You treat it as not as a victim and an offender, but this is a thing that has happened within your whānau, and that needs to be fixed within your whānau, rather than the labelling and punishment of an offender. And we do have some initiatives that have attempted to do that. There are specialist family violence courts and new legislation that is, but again, as Ruth will know, that has been a long running saga, really, how to appropriately respond to violence, which agencies it sits with. Is it a family court matter? Is it a criminal court matter? And people get very, about criminal justice altogether, the idea of handing over responsibility for dealing with offending to families and communities is a really big political football. People get very very scared by that.
And I think it's fair if I just quickly share my own experience of that, of us saying to a judge that we would look after someone, and that reo and tikanga was part of the environment they were coming into, and that judge agreed that was actually, they actually said, there is nothing that this court can offer that is better than the environment they can go into. But that only happened because the judge they happened to get that day was Hemi Taumaunu. And I was struck by my privilege, because so many of our people can't say that. They can't offer a solution and be believed. And I think about the weight it must be on you as a Māori lawyer to see all of this and be in these systems. What do you see and what did you experience as a Māori lawyer working in those systems and the challenges and the very difficult situations and aroha that comes up for you?
Yeah, well, I only practiced for a few years in the late 1990s, and none of them, there were very, very few Māori judges then. There are now 31 in the district court, Māori judges. One in the High Court, and of course Tājo in the Supreme Court. But then there was really Eddie Jury, but really nobody else. So it was much less knowledge and acceptance of, and to be honest, very few advocates would run that kind of attempt at advocacy. There have been some long-term warriors like Annette Sykes who have, but they are very few and far between. So the big movement has been the courage and bravery of advocates to do things differently, and the education of judges, particularly of not, because it's absolutely unsustainable to say, I just want to wait till I get Judge Taumanu, you know, or can I have, you can't go judge shopping, that's not looked upon. People try it, but it's not looked upon very kindly. And actually it's not tenable. All judges, all decision makers, whether you're a policeman, a prosecutor who's deciding, you know, so for the police the question is, you know, who do we stop, who do we talk to, why are we stopping them? What charges, what decisions do we make? And then they are the major gatekeepers. And then we get to the court, and again it's about what information are you going to listen to that you deem relevant? And you might be lucky where they say, actually that proposal you've put forward, that's relevant. And so I think we're at the stage of we're almost at that tipping point where there is pretty good base knowledge. Everyone knows it's an issue. How could you not? How could you not? If you practice in the district courts, whether it's family, criminal, not civil, not so much, but if you practice in those courts, you cannot help but see that everybody around you tends to be Māori, except the decision maker. So it's really incumbent upon them, and that's not about a treaty thing, that's just about a numbers issue, right? That it's an overwhelming experience of, and so really by force of numbers that they're coming to terms with, well, we need to know something about these people, about the way that they think, about why they are here, and about what they can offer that could change this situation.
I noticed you said before that you didn't have career plans, but why did you choose to not practice for too long and then become staff? I mean, you're an amazing teacher, I know that. I know by how your students respond. Feel free to clap at any point. But I know from the presents that they give you, and I know that
today I got a cheesecake and a box of chocolate.
What more would you want? I mean, yes, you've got a lot of Flash Awards, but then you get given cheesecake. So why did you choose the path that you did, and is it about advocacy and making a difference?
So I didn't. I left law school, and when I left law school at University of Auckland, there were two Māori legal academics, a brand new one, the amazing Andrea Tunks, Noa Whakatohia, and Whaianan Thomas from Te Raroa. And Nin was this formidable tarara woman, and she demanded that I come back to help her. I was quite happy starting out as a court lawyer, and because we do things out of a sense of aroha and obligation, and she said we need you, and so I did. I thought, oh well, I'll go do that half-time, and so that was never in the plan, and I turned up, and quite begrudgingly, I must say, because I thought I was going to be the next female Victor Cifuentes in a red convertible car. That never happened, so you
had an SUV, family.
Yeah, that's right. And I turned up to my very first class, and I stood at the lectern, and as soon as I opened my mouth, I knew I loved it, and I knew I was going to love it. So so I stayed. 23 years later, I'm still there. I kind of thought, I'll just go back to court later, and it's never happened.
Do you do what Nin did to other people? and tell them they have to come and work for you?
A little bit. One of the things that I always think is quite hilarious, anyone who knew Nin, and Nin passed 7 years ago this year, she was an absolutely formidable presence, and I was really a quivering, very shy little sheep next to her. And now I have students that say that they find me quite intimidating and scary, and I think, man, I am so nice. I just want to show them, I wish that Nin would be roaring with laughter in her grave at Pukepoto if she knew that people thought that I was intimidating.
But you're a change maker, you are a change maker. Tell me about the path that it took for Māori content or the Māori curriculum to be part of a law degree. How did it get there?
Yeah, that's been a huge journey. So again, when I started university in 1991, this was all around, there was a little burst of me and my contemporaries wanting to come to law school because this was the era of treaty settlements. Everyone wanted to be a treaty settlement lawyer and work for their hapu o iwi. So there was a burst of us, and that meant they had to have some content for us, but it was always in very niche. At law schools there's compulsory content that you have to do in any law degree in the world, boring old contract and land law, and then you get to choose the niche things you want to do. And Māori content was always in that camp, and they were always small classes that tended to be the handful of Māori students. So there was no mainstreaming, except for the slight, the growth of jurisprudence cases around the treaty under Justice Robin Cook as President of the Court of Appeal from the late 1980s onwards. So public law and constitutional law started to talk about Māori stuff in the sense of te tiriti, but not in the sense of tikanga Māori. Tikanga Māori was only for the little room over there for you three. To go and talk about tikanga o the whenua.
Literally three?
Often, yeah. So that's how it was in the early 90s, and it's grown from there. And just a couple of months ago, we've had the biggest shake-up to legal education since the 1960s, which is that the Council of Legal Education that prescribes those core things that you have to do in any law degree has made a decision, after being pushed quite hard, I must say, to make both tikanga and te tiriti education mainstreamed and compulsory across all core subjects.
See, this is what it would be like when you went to be Prime Minister. People would clap. So who's designing that curriculum?
Yeah, so that's a really big ask. And I think the funny thing is that people think that it was a big risk for the non-Māori to take that leap, and that's practitioners, judiciary. Actually, it's much more scary for us as Māori, because this is about the sharing of our tikanga. Just because the Council of Legal Education says you need to have a relationship with mana whenua and that they need to come and teach law students about their tikanga doesn't mean they have to come. Why would they? So actually the internal negotiation and relationship that needs to be set up, that's going to be the big work over the next year to 2 years, I think. And so that's going to, so I think the most exciting thing is that it's not just about what we teach, but who teaches it, where it's done. I would love it if we would go to Ōrākei or Manurewa or any of the many marae of Tamaki. At AUT, of course, we have law taught both in the central city, which would be obviously Ngāti Whātua, Ki Ōrākei, but we are also at Manukau, so we're looking towards Tainui territory there. So we're going to have numerous relationships with different people. So the idea is that wherever the law schools are, they are going to get tikanga education that is relevant to the mana whenua of that territory. So they're going to learn about contract law. If you're at Waikato, they're going to have an amazing education in relation to land law. It's a real game changer.
But I hear you in terms of saying how hard it is to build those relationships and then the capacity within each iwi to deliver that. So that's your job as well, is it?
That's the next step, I think, is establishing those relationships in ways that are not, and you know, we used to think the dirty word was colonisation, the dirty C word was colonisation, it's actually consultation, in ways that are not exploitative of our tikanga pukenga, right? So that will require, we can't have Tahirani Mead come to do a class, you know, he's like 95 years old. Or,
sharp ass though.
Well, yes, but we can't be having these taonga come to 6 law schools. So we're going to have to do it in a way that maybe captures content that is shared in a repository. So it's going to be quite different, I think, the way that it's going to have to be done. But I'm excited thinking about it.
And what have responses been to that so far?
The really positive response has been from students and young people everywhere of all colour and of all backgrounds. Students are here for it. It's a generational thing to be suspicious and untrusting of Māori things is actually, you know, is so passé. You know. The thing that actually made me cry at the meeting that we were at the council meeting where the resolution was passed, was that there are representatives of the judiciary, there are all of the law deans, and then there are representatives of the profession. And the representatives of the profession were 2 young Pākehā male lawyers, and they were falling over themselves to move and second the motion. And they were the real champions on the day. They wanted to be seen to be the people and they were totally there for it. And that seems to be the response so far. Colleagues, a bit mixed, mostly good. Obviously, my colleagues that are here today are here for it.
All their surveillance is really good.
All their texting right now. She's at it again.
Actually, I was interested in that because when you became the Dean of Law School, a couple of weeks before that, I'd been saying to people, when's she going to get fired? This is so awesome. You don't hold back, do you? Especially on social media. You actually even say, I go to my office and I go, wow, the key still works. So you're that person, and then I have respect for the fact that AUT went, she should be the Dean. Is that because you have to be like that? Is that the only way you can be? Or is it strategic in terms of what you talk about, and what you push?
Well, partly it's a ngāpuhi thing. So we'll start there. Muskatanga. But I will say this, is that even though I do have a bit of a reputation for shooting from the hip and saying things, you know, that might be a bit out there, but I can say that I do think, actually, in reality, I think about them really carefully before I do them. I think about the consequences, so it's not flippant. So it is generally strategic. And sometimes knowing that, this could get me in quite a lot of trouble. It has sometimes, but when you're in that kind of, your litmus test. I was in a hui on last Friday and chaired by Tākim Workman, and his litmus test, because I said to him, beforehand, when Māoris go into a hui, when you're in the minority, you always have a pre-hui hui. So in our pre-hui hui, when we're in the corner, I was like, okay, how are we going to play this? And I said to him, how do we know? Because it was with the police. And we were all really, even though he used to be a cop, you're all really wary of saying, I don't want to be seen. The police were saying there's potential reputational and brand damage of us having you two on our committee. And I said, there's reputation damage for us being associated with the Popo. Anyway, and I said to him, how do we know then? Like, are we going to have a wink or a nudge? Like, if we know, we're not sure, what's the litmus test? And he said, the litmus, he's from Kahununu, so the East Coast, Ki Wairarapa, and he said that the litmus test for me is always, if I said what I'm about to say, or I did what I'm about to do, in a hui in Flaxmere, would I get out of the room unharmed? And I loved that. And so we all have our own version of that. And the other thing, I was going to say, the other Kahununu wise man, Matua Moana Jackson, often sometimes I would ask him and say, should I do this or should I do that or say this or that? And he was always in that very he had the most amazing. The other thing is the way you say it, Apparently I'm quite loud, whereas he says outrageous things in this ridiculous softest voice. We need to burn the system. He's usually looking away. And I can't. So that the gentle, what do they call it? Gentle revolutionary. Yeah. Whereas I don't have that. But he does say, if you want to do something, courage is the deep breath you take before you do something difficult. Yeah, and I often think about that. You pause and then you do it anyway. Yeah.
So we talked about Wanda Jackson, Lynn Thomas, Andrea Tunks, your heartstrong teacher. Who else is that little voice telling you and directing you and guiding you? Everyone in Flaxmere at that point.
I do genuinely think about what would my relations think, so, as a whole, and particularly my relations that are doing it tough, and there are lots of them. I do think about, other than those people you've mentioned, not many other individuals, but groups, and so very, the thing, when you're someone as privileged as we are, in terms of economic privilege. I'm a middle-class, urban, non-Reo speaking Māori who is white passing. My daughter came home the other day and she said to me, they're talking about race politics. She's in year 12, that's sixth form for us old people. And she comes home and she goes, I know we're Māori, Mum, but given that you are white passing, do you consider yourself a woman of colour? Don't use that Americanism term around.
Was that what you said to her? A longer answer? But that is interesting. Do you consider yourself white passing? Because I just see you as Ngāpuhi as.
Well, I think there comes a time in your life where it becomes obvious. I can genuinely say at school I was white passing, and that was because of external constructions of you or perceptions, right? That I was always in the top stream, and I remember when I won a really big scholarship when I finished school, and I had to go back to school to get it, and it was the Ngāti Mu scholarship, right? So it was a Ngāti Porou tupuna, and my principal said, oh, we didn't know you were Māori. And so it was a sort of home, and you couldn't learn the reo at school, and so it was like a home identity rather than a school social identity. And then I made the choice though, I outed myself the very first day of university when Andrea Tunks was manning a desk for Māori law students, and she said, is there anybody in the queue? These were the days when you enrolled at university and you had to line up down Simon Street, in the hot sun and all these desks, and she yelled out, is there anyone in the queue that wants to be is Māori or would like to be? Why wouldn't you?
And so she looked at you, and then what happened?
And then I was in the club, and that was it, yeah.
And then you talk about not having the reo yourself, but I know that the story is different for your tamariki, and that's a source of pride for you. Can you tell me about that journey and how you've championed the return of te reo Māori to your whānau?
Yeah, so I don't. It is the greatest regret of my life that I don't. And I understand, and I know the mahi that you and Scotty and others do in terms of, it never being too late. But I do regret and am angry and annoyed and all of those other emotions that I don't have it. I went to a huge state school where I wrote a column about this a couple of months ago, and there was one Māori girl in 7th form who all the way through school did the reo by correspondence, and at the time I thought, why are you doing that? And now I think, man, I wonder what happened to her. She's, but I didn't have that tenacity. And now with our 3 kids, they're all taking the reo. My son is now in his first year of university, studying the reo. He's largely self-taught. He did take it at school, but in a large state school where there's not a lot of instruction, and he will be the first fluent speaker in our extended whānau of more than 100 people in 3 generations. So it's huge, it's massive. So every time he gets up to speak, I cry like a baby. He's really embarrassed. But it's amazing, you know.
He mea nui, and I can't let you go with saying you don't have that ill as if you're never going to have that ill, because the voice that you do have you use incredibly well, and I know how clever you are. So if you just focus on the reo like you focus on sci-fi movies and stuff, I think there's a lot of potential there. But what I want to say is that just kawe po he, just don't believe that it's never happening for you. You never know. Incredible woman. I'd like to bring your attention now to some of your tweets. This could just be a comedy show from here on, but no. Actually, I will make it a serious one. This is about abuse and state care. And you've tweeted about how background reports, that S27 reports on offenders, often detail horrific victimisation in state care, and how inmates know each other already from sharing their childhoods in state houses of horror. And you asked in that tweet, how to fix men we broke as kids. So when you talk about that understanding, what do we need to do once we understand that is the situation that someone has lived through?
So that is the first step, is sharing the information. Most people probably know what Section 27 cultural reports are. I started writing them in 2017. I've done about 150 of them, and the idea is that it's only something that appears at sentencing. The idea was that someone from an offender's whānau or community would stand up and speak to their background to explain how they became the person that's here. And also, as Stacey mentioned earlier in relation to the person she appeared for, what can we do for them? You know, what's the alternative? So here's the information about this person, dimensioning them is what Joe Williams calls it. How do we dimension that person to share their story and offer an alternative so they can make different decisions? That's the kaupapa. So the first thing to fix the broken man who might be there for really serious, long-standing violence is to understand where it came from. And a good report, so I do want to say, absolutely, the gold standard of reports is not to have an independent report writer like me, it is to have whānau speaking for themselves. So the idea is to empower whānau. But actually there are lots of people who are unwilling or unable to do that. But the first thing is and I've had people disclose the most horrific things, which they don't do to lawyers, because we train lawyers to act in very specific ways, to ask very specific questions that are oriented to particular things. Whereas this is like narrative, conversational kōrero with people who trust you with their story. And often that will be something they've never told anybody else. And I think I tweeted that on the day I met this man, this Ngāpuhi man in Mount Eden prison, who was in his 50s, and in the sort of small talk, get to know each other part of our conversation, I said, you always ask about, whether people come and visit them, if they talk to their kids on the phone, that kind of thing. And you often ask about their cellmate, and I said, how's your cellie? And he goes, yeah, he's cool. We first celled together when we were 8 at Kōrero Beach, when we were sent there as kids. And he was like, he's my bro. I'm like, that's 42 years later. Here he is sharing, and they've had the same journey, which was just horrific. To think about those as family relationships, to think about. And the other thing I want to mention that I haven't yet is prison is really only like the worst possible place you can think of for certain people. So it's sort of a Pākehā middle class bogey place, because it's so foreign to them. You will never go to a prison. You don't know anyone in there. You don't know what they do. They only hit the media at Christmas time when the Herald decides to tell you that they're having chicken for dinner, or when there is a riot, or only at certain times is there any information about what happens in prison gets out. For Māori, we all know about prison. We all know the people that are in there, that have been in there. we've all visited. You know, it is just part of our, not even imagination, part of our reality. And even worse than that is that it's often the safest, warmest, driest place where people, it's the first place they've had I had a guy last week tell me it was the first place he had a bed to himself. And have been fed 3 times a day. You know, so actually, the big prison is Tracy, my friend Tracy McIntosh talks about, is the lives of confinement that people live in the real community, of restricted lives, which are like virtual prisons in terms of the choices and opportunities that people have to make, where they actually think that going to prison is easier. Lots of people tell you that.
Oh yeah, and that it's not actually that bad. That's the one I've heard, and it's a really conflicting thing to hear. But it's hard, and I guess when you look at those reports, are they being listened to? Do they make a difference?
So as I've said, we really only started doing them 4 years ago, and I think they've made. It was like this weird side hustle that I started. So it was one of those things. And I'll say this about them, is that it was a real lesson to me about the law. And the law, there's a thing in law teaching called the law in books versus the law in action, right? So what the law says it is and what actually happens is often miles apart. This was an example of that. I talked about this provision, Section 27, for years and years. And all I'd say in the class every year was, no one ever uses it. No one ever uses it. Never happened, nothing happens. Then one year I thought, well, why don't I do one? And I did. And then I thought, oh, well, I'll just keep doing them. And the first one I did was the judge got it, and he was like, oh. And then they handed it around, and it was like online, and so it became a thing. And then we thought, well, let's make it a thing. And so I started teaching other friends and colleagues how to do them. And then just as sort of a community, so it's like community action, right? We decided to do something and made it happen. And it's had really quite massive traction in 4 years. It could be better, but it has kept lots of people out of prison. So it has there are different strengths. I think one is the choice to do something different. The other is, even if someone has done something very serious and it's inevitable under the current regime that they are going to prison, what is going to be offered to them will be different because of the information given in the, so whether it's about counselling, PTSD, sexual abuse, victimisation, so the things, and also where they go. If it's a Tāne Māori says that they really want to learn the reo, really want to know about who they are and where they come from, then it could be a recommendation to go to a Māori focus unit. So where they're going to serve their centre. So all sorts of different outcomes. It's not just about keeping people out of prison, it's about responding appropriately to their offending needs, so that hopefully they don't come back.
I know some people who write reports and it's big money. We've talked about pure and ways that they actually have to keep themselves safe when they're in contact with these very heavy kōrero. What do you do to bring yourself into a state of, I guess, protection or honouring the kōrero that you're listening to, but then taking yourself out of it?
Yep, that took me a while, because for the first while, all I did was I'd get in the car afterwards and cry in the car park. And my mum's an Anglican minister, so she would, throw the holy water and things. And then I learned how to karakia, and actually Dame Nader shared one of Pāteit's karakia about throwing away heavy things off you. So karakia really important. Usually go have a swim or a walk. You do the whakanoa thing. So rather than, I know some people do professional supervision, actually talk to people. So there's a network of just other writers that I will talk to when I do those things. But in terms of the bringing yourself back is largely karakia and nature kind of things.
And important, whakanoa, whakawhenua, and bring yourself back to that place. It's, I guess, something that's not always taught in law school, is it?
No. Yeah. But actually, increasingly, that is recognised as a thing. So, I mentioned before this idea that lawyers are seen to be objective, arm's length parties, or not parties, but advocates. But there is very real trauma transference that happens when you're dealing with people. I mean, you're a problem solver. That's what you do, which means that you listen to people's problems and you can't help but be affected by those things, which is why in the profession there are extremely high rates of self-harm, suicide, depression, anxiety, so mental distress. And so that has become more of a response that particularly our current president of the Law Society, Tiana Ipati, has addressed, the need to have a panel of friends to talk to, the idea of professional supervision, of having to, again, talk through some of the material that you have to deal with.
And speaking of which, I'd like to see my last question before I ask you all to do a little bit of an activity and then come back to us with a Q&A. Tell me about your fan club that respond to your columns that are online to start. That's slightly sarcastic. There are a lot of fans, but the people who are anti-fans are usually the ones who are the most vocal, aren't they?
So, it's funny. So, how long have I been doing that? For about almost a year now. I've been writing this column, which is in Stuff at the weekends, and it's in the Don Post and Christchurch Press, and so it's in print form as well. And actually, so for me, it's one of the actually hardest writing gigs ever, because you have to think of something to write about. But no matter what, so I write about all sorts of things, but no matter what I write about, there are some really special people in the community that have to, so one, they take the time to look you up, because obviously I don't have my email address, it's just your name. So they look you up and they send you an email or a voicemail message sometimes. Sometimes they're really to the point. How do you sleep at night? How do you live with yourself? And then there are the really lengthy offensive ones around, you Māoris just need to be grateful for the invention of the wheel.
Or Jemima Tiatia got the
very
one
similar.
Yes.
I literally think I got someone from the same person.
Oh,
really.
your grandfather built this country.
Exactly. They're quite odd. And then I got a really interesting one last week, which was someone just sent me a book. So this is next level. They spent money, $40, and couriered it. So that was another $8 on why critical race theory ruined the world. No name, no address, nothing. Just the book in a bag. It was supreme passag move by someone with too much money.
Too much money, too much time, and not enough brains. Hoi anō. Me pēhea, taku mihi ki a koe te tuakana, nā te mea mai rāno kua pēnei koe, kua whawhai, kua tino mahi nui koe, kua kōkiri koe ngā kaupapa nui. Ko tō iwi Māori, ngā mea kua whai kua i a koe. So I know that everything you do, you just need to know that the respect that I can feel for you in this room is massive. And the fact that you do this much mahi, but you still seem to be fully operational is incredible, no doubt testament to your whānau. But I'm so grateful, and I don't like to think about what the world would be like without Khylee Quince. Anytime my nail polish matches my outfit, I think I'm so Khylee Quince right now. She has goals in so many ways. No reira tēnā koa, e hoa mā homai te pakipaki nui. Ki tēnei waka. One day is that I get to call you in a way that I guess to quote MC Hammer, Chief Justice. Dun, 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 dun. That's what I hope. I don't even know if it works like that, but anyway. Anei te karakia whakakapi. So to close everything that we've done today, just recognising all the energy, all of the effort, all of the whakaaro, all of what you've brought here today and to close it with our karakia. Te whakaiatanga te whakaiatanga Tēnei te wānanga kāia, tēnei te kaupapa kāia, ko te mauri o te kaupapa ka whakamoia, ko te mauri o te wānanga ka whakamoia, koa ki runga, koa ki raro, hauie, huie! Hauie!